Welcome to Fruity Knitting. This is our 97th episode. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Andrea.
And we hope very much that today's episode will make you smile and bring you some joy. We've got a bit of everything in the show today. Very cute, cuddly animals, inspiring stories of outstanding people, fun crochet projects, beautiful knitting projects. And we're taking you outside for some fresh air and some breathtaking scenery.
And we have a major two-part interview with Kerry Lord, who is the founder of the UK knit and crochet company TOFT. We did this interview during our Christmas holiday late last year. So TOFT's company, the headquarters of TOFT is in Warwickshire in the UK, and it's on their family alpaca farm. And Kerry is seriously one of the most dynamic people I've met since we started producing Fruity Knitting. She's only in her mid-30s, and the story of how she's built up her business is quite exceptional. So if you're a knitter, a designer, a small business owner, or all of the above, I'm sure you're going to find Kerry hugely inspiring. I find her really inspiring. So the interview is a little bit longer than what we normally do, but we cover lots of information and it really does go at a fast pace. And I think this is because Kerry just has so much energy and a lot of knowledge to share, so time just flies by. And Kerry's parents were amongst the first alpaca farmers in the UK, and through their breeding program, they've really influenced alpaca farming in the UK. And Kerry does all of the sorting of the alpaca fleeces herself, so she's quite an expert in that area as well. So in part 2 of the interview, we get a mini lesson on sorting, grading, and understanding alpaca fibre, which is really helpful as knitters or spinners. So that's interesting. I think you'll like that. And of course, we get to see the alpacas themselves up close, and we've got some great fun footage of the little crias, which are the baby alpacas rolling around and having fun.
Very cute.
Yeah.
Then we've got some finished projects to show you. We've got some new projects that we're starting and some we're still thinking about. And amongst all that, we are taking you on a hike to see this beautiful, enchanting scenery.
Yeah, so it's a good program. So we're starting with me. Last episode, I showed you the yarn and the pattern that I'd picked out to be my very next project. Well, I've made a start on it, and here it is. It's called Sky, and it's a design by Marie Wallen. And the yarn I'm using is the Hampshire 4-ply from the Grey Sheep Company. So this soft grey colour is their natural undyed shade. And this sort of salmony pink colour is called Rosehip, if you want to look it up. So here's a picture of the design, and it's knitted in the round, bottom up, and then you join the body and the sleeves together and knit the yoke in one piece. So because I've knitted it in the round, or I'm knitting it in the round, I did my swatch in the round as well, and here it is. This is just a swatch for the colourwork section. What's interesting is that you can get to know a designer's recommended gauge if you knit enough of their patterns. And I've knitted a lot of Marie Wallen designs, and I find that I can easily get her recommended gauge. And also, more importantly, I really love the density of the fabric that her recommended gauges produce. So I think I like a slightly firmer fabric than what some designers prefer. And she must as well, because every time I knit her recommended gauge, I'm really, really satisfied with the feeling of the fabric. Yep. And that's a real bonus, because it means I don't have to recalculate the maths of the pattern to fit my preferred gauge.
Yeah, I can remember you doing that.
Yeah.
Changing materials.
Yeah, I've done it a lot. Yep. So like Andrew said, if I see a gorgeous design, that won't stop me from knitting it. I'll just recalculate the maths it fits a fabric that I prefer. So it is a good skill to have. It means you've got more options. So if you've never, yes, like I said, my swatch is done in the round so that I can be as accurate as possible. If you haven't done that, this is how you do it. You use a long circular needle like this. So once you've knitted across one row, you skirt all the stitches down to the other end of the needle. You take your yarn and you loosely bring it around behind. You see how loose that is? It's all dangling down. And then you knit the second row also on the right side of the fabric. So you're never knitting back on the wrong side of the fabric. And you just keep doing that. And that emulates knitting in the round, and it'll give you a much more accurate gauge. And that's kind of important, because I think the gauge for this is something like 31 stitches for 10 centimetres. So that's quite a lot of stitches. And that will change. If you've got 30 stitches or 29 stitches, that'll really make a big difference to the final width of your garment. So it is really worth being as accurate as possible. So there we go. That's that. Now, I want to show you the book. It comes from North Sea, this pattern does. So, and this is a really beautiful book. It's a collection of 8 patterns, and all of the designs are modelled and photographed on Shetland. So I just love looking through the photographs because I feel like I can just really recognise all of these places. So there's 8 designs in the collection, and they're all garments, and they're a mixture of jumpers and cardigans, and they are all loose fitting. So 2 have all over ferrule patterns, and the other 6 have very beautiful cables or twisted stitch patterning over the majority of the garment. And Marie writes that the collection is inspired by a traditional fisherman knitwear. So the colour palette is fairly neutral. It's just using beautiful blues and grey tones, which is synonymous with seascapes around the North Sea. I actually think it's been photographed on Unst, which is the northernmost island in Shetland. Anyway, it's a really beautiful book.
Yeah, well, you get pictures of Unst as well as all the designs.
Yeah.
Which is good.
So I think that the design that I've chosen is the most eye-catching and beautiful one, in my opinion. So I'm highly motivated to do it. But to be honest, it's a bit of a slog, and that's because of the twisted stitches. If you've never done twisted stitches before, they look like a 2-stitch cable, just two stitches travelling and crossing each other like this. So, but you don't do them like a cable. You actually knit into both stitches on the left-hand needle before pulling them off. So the ones that are going from bottom left to top right, they're fairly easy to do, but the ones that are going in the opposite direction, you have to have your needle behind, sort of at a more awkward position. It really slows the rhythm of your knitting down. So I find that quite annoying. And there seems to be more of those than the other way, which is also getting on my goat.
Yeah, I'd have to say, rather you than me.
Yeah, but the good thing about twisted stitches is they allow you to do very detailed, intricate patterning without having too thick a layer on the fabric, because with cables you're pretty well, when you're moving multiple stitches across each other, you've got 2 layers of fabric and it makes it extra bulky and extra warm. But with twisted stitches you can have all of that intricate detailed patterning and still have a single layer. So they do create beautiful fabrics, as you can see. And I shouldn't complain because the whole jumper is cropped and fairly fitted, so it's not like it's a huge oversized garment. I don't have that much to do, so I'll stop complaining. But the other thing is, this is my last project. I've just finished it, and it was done with the superfine Saxon Merino yarn, which is just buttery soft. And working with this yarn, it definitely has more of a bite, for sure. But I don't mind, because it means that once I wear it, I can sort of play around with the dog. I can wear a backpack that might sort of rub a bit and it won't peel, because unfortunately Andrew's is just starting to peel a bit on the inside of your arms, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit.
Which is not so good. So you have to be really precious when you're wearing that.
Yeah.
A bit more precious than normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's time to introduce you to Geraldine the duck. Here she is. Hello. Last episode I introduced you to Cindy the flamingo. This was going to be Andrew's first crochet project, but after I finished Cindy, it was just so addictive, I couldn't stop myself starting Geraldine. So, but we do have enough yarn left over, so you can definitely knit a little version. You might do Geraldine's little sister.
Yeah. I don't know Geraldine's little sister's name.
Oh, you can cross that bridge once you've done it.
No, I need to know where I'm heading, dolls.
Okay. So I think before doing these two, I've never made toys before, and they are surprisingly fun and addictive. And it is good to do an unusual project, or a project that you don't normally do every now and again. It sort of spices your life up a little bit. Okay, so what did I want to say? Oh, yes. Now, I did think I've got to put in a pipe cleaner or a thin bit of wire or something to help hold their heads up straight, because they're just looking a little bit too sleepy, and they've got these chubby tummies here, so they kind of look like they've just pigged out on a big meal, and all they want to do is flop on the couch and have a big snooze.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit lazy. They're not allowed to be. They've got to hold their heads up straight and be upstanding citizens and be productive and contribute to society. But they don't listen to me.
That's not the character that they radiate to me, dolls, I gotta say.
No, they're not listening, are you? Anyway, they're super cute. They're both TOFT designs, and very soon you're going to meet Kerry, who designed them, along with about 100 other species of birds and every imaginable dog breed and sheep breed and lots of fantasy creatures and dolls. And you can see that they've got a very similar body and leg form. So once you've done one, the second one really flies along. It goes very fast. And the whole design is done in the UK double crochet stitch. And you start at the base of the body, doing the UK double crochet stitch in a spiral. You're working up the body. You can see his little tummy there. And also that both birds have got a little chest here, just like birds, because birds do have nice plump round chests. And so you do the body and the neck and the head in the spiral all in one piece. And then all of the other limbs are done separately and attached on afterwards. And they're very, very similar. You can see that, all of their body parts. Even the tail feathers are constructed in the same way, but Cindy's tail feathers are just longer, more elongated. And the legs are constructed in the same way, but Geraldine's a squatter. And she's got fatter feet because she's got web feet like a little ducky. Actually, her legs were easier to do because the spiral circumference was wider, so it was less fiddly. So they're very, very cute. And you can see that Kerry quite cleverly has kept as much as possible similar, and she's just taken key characteristics of the birds to differentiate them so that their species are instantly recognisable.
Yep.
And that's a really clever thing to be able to do. It takes a lot of skill. It's like being a good cartoonist. Yeah, so there we go. And I think I'm going to have a hard time giving them away.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking this, and I think actually we can't.
Yeah.
Because if we put a bit of wire in to keep their heads up,
yeah,
so they're good members of society,
yeah,
they're no longer safe for children.
They'll be all right with pipe cleaners. You could do it for pipe cleaners.
Oh, you've got to make sure.
But
you
anyway,
can't be taking any risks, though.
They did tell me that they don't really want to go away. They've got used to sitting on that. They like hanging out together on top of the fruit bowl on the table because they sit up nice and tall and they can look over the edge of the table and make fun of Jack, and he can't do anything about it, and I think that's pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
So they're naughty birds.
Yeah.
Naughty, sleepy, lazy birds. So right now you're going to meet their designer. Welcome to Fruity Knitting. Today we're in Warwickshire in the UK at the TOFT headquarters, which is located within the TOFT Alpaca farm. And with me is the founder and owner of TOFT, Kerry Lord. So TOFT produces alpaca and wool yarns with accompanying knitwear and crochet designs, and at the centre of the business is the fabulous Amigurumi book series, Edward's Menagerie, and there's now 6 books in the series, and together with the yarn kits they're sold in stores all around the world. So Kerry is only in her mid-30s, and the story of how she's built up her business I think is really exceptional and fascinating. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us and coming on Fruity Knitting.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me too.
Good. Okay. So you were actually 21 when you started this business, and you hadn't had any training in business management or the textile industry. You'd just finished your degree in humanities.
Yep.
So tell us how you got started and then how the business progressed to where it is today.
So it's a long and varied story. I really set out straight from university, and my degree is in English literature. Then I came back from university to my parents' alpaca farm, and they at that point had about 100 alpacas, and they had fleece coming out of their ears. So we had alpacas are sheared once a year, and their fleece continues to grow regardless of whether you're going to turn that into a yarn or not. So every single room was full of alpaca fleece. So I was tasked initially with find someone to buy it. Basically, this is taking over. Please get it gone. Get it out of our sight. Find somewhere for it to go. So that's what I did. My hunt began there, and I looked at the wool marketing board. I went to all the traditional places that I presumed would be looking to buy this alpaca fleece, and I got a no everywhere I went. I really tried hard. It didn't make sense to me at all that this fibre was starting to become valuable. So I was starting to see it on the market in the high street. So alpaca used as blends in kind of high street knitwear, and decided, well, this doesn't make sense. If I've got this big resource, why does no one want to buy it? But I couldn't find anyone to buy it. So I said, okay, I will turn it into the next point. So I'll add value to turn it onto a yarn. And that's when my journey really began, because I started to learn about yarn. I didn't know anything about yarn. I wasn't a knitter. I wasn't a crocheter. So I decided the best way to learn about it was to head off to the mills that would be turning it into the next process. So at which point I identified about 5 across the UK. So there was one in Wales, a few in Yorkshire, the places you'd expect them to be. And I asked them, or begged them in some parts, to let me go and see the process. So rather than just sending a fleece off and getting it processed, I said, I'll come with my fleece. I'd really like to see it go through. I'd understand this a little bit more and start to understand what you do to make it turn out a certain way. So the first TOFT fleeces were spun then, about 13 years ago. And I stayed at various places for various lengths of time, learning a little bit more about it. But I tried out all of the mills in the UK. So then I had some yarn, and I said, okay, so now I've got yarn. I'll be able to sell this yarn, no problem at all. So I approached local knitting shops, the kind of places that you presume would want to buy your yarn, and nobody wanted to buy my yarn either. And that was mainly because there was no patterns to go with said accompanying yarn. Yes, I'd spun a yarn that was okay and standard, but I didn't really know how to sell it. So then the next stage happened.
And you didn't know how to knit.
No, I didn't know how to knit. So that's the next stage, is I had to learn to knit. And I'm not entirely sure how I met this lady, but this lady definitely changed my life. Her name is Lynn Wallace, and her company was called Woolly Wonders at the time. And she welcomed me in with open arms. I probably approached her trying to sell her my yarn, is what happened. And she said, I'm not really interested in buying a yarn, but here, come and learn to knit and understand why a yarn is a certain way and why it should be spun in a certain way.
And so you lived with her for 3 days.
I did. She welcomed me into her house for 3 days as a complete stranger, just to pass on her passion and her craft. So she also taught me in a very different way to, I think, how a lot of people are taught. So she taught me to actually understand what I was doing and what I was constructing, rather than sitting me down and making me cast on with a pattern of here's a hat cast on with this pattern. She very much taught me in a totally stripped back way of cast on 10 stitches and measure how big that is, and then measure how big a head is. So she taught me, I guess, to think about it in a completely different way.
To design and knit at the same time.
From the very beginning. Yeah. So to start to think about what I wanted and how I would get to that design, rather than just choosing a pattern that someone else had written and following the said instructions.
And what was interesting about this lady is she had a cottage industry, didn't she, of knitters?
Yeah, she did. Yeah. So on the side, that's what I got exposed to, really, was the fact that she was running a business where she had lots of home workers who were knitting up her designs, and then she was selling those on to retailers. So it was a variety of different things. There was a lot of baby products in there, children's products, hot water bottles, and she had those knitted up and then sold those products on to other people. So she lent me her knitting circle, probably to get the first TOFT ready-to-wear products made. So I came up with some really basic designs. Obviously, as a newbie knitter, I could only really design basic designs. And then I used her team of knitters to turn those into products to sell those onto shows. I rapidly realised I was quite good at selling hats, quite good at selling the final product. And so then I had to build my own circle of knitters to be able to support the business growing. So I actually eventually built up about 30 home workers myself, based over here in Warwickshire. And they were then doing that same process as I was doing very basic designs. I'm quite obsessed with the idea of making sure that they didn't take too long to knit.
Yeah.
Because quite rapidly I realised that as the thing that I needed as much as possible was for them to come in under 2 to 3 hours to make sure that the price point at the top end.
So you're
made
thinking
sense.
like a business person from the beginning. You have to
from
be
the
able
very
to
beginning.
pay them a decent wage
Yeah.
and not have them spending hours and hours.
Yeah, and I was
something.
frustrated myself by how long it took to knit. So I was obviously, again, when you're learning, it does take a long time, I think. So I was quite conscious of if I'm going to help this process and I'm going to knit some hats myself to sell, which I did in those very early days, I needed to make sure that I could make them fast enough too for that to make sense.
Now, how was it getting all these new knitters on board? I suppose you learned people skills pretty quickly.
Yeah, I did. And absolutely, I think my business success until now, a lot of it was formed in those early days because I was dealing with people's emotions from the very beginning. So a lot of these women were women who'd been crafting their whole life. They'd been knitting and crocheting. I obviously didn't know a lot at all, but probably had very set ideas about what I wanted on the end of it. So I had to very early on learn to deal with people carefully, to not hurt their feelings, but also stay very true to my quality standards, that I knew straight away I was going to do all the sewing up and finishing. So I was definitely certain that was to my standard. I also learnt very early on tips and tricks, like teaching people not to ever use a knot inside things, and all those things that I had taken for granted because I'd been taught by somebody whose those things were important to, that people that had been knitting for 50 years would know, but turns out they don't. So I had to pass on a lot of those basics to ensure my quality.
Finishing.
Yeah, professional finishing, yeah.
Yeah. And then I imagine at some stage you would have run out of fleece because you just had your own farm here. You started to buy in fleece, didn't you?
Yeah, almost immediately we ran out of fleece. That sounds like a lot, 100 alpacas. It really isn't once you start to turn that into yarn. So say in terms of hats, you'd get about 10 to 12 hats from one alpaca per year. And yeah, so it's not a lot. I rapidly ran out of fleece. So we started buying in fleece from alpaca farmers across the UK and then hand sorting that to ensure that the yarn was the best standard.
Okay, and then at some stage even that ran out, didn't it?
Yeah, then that ran out. So then about, basically it came at the same time that when the business really grew when I wrote Edward's Menagerie, so the book that you're holding in your hand. It changed my business completely. That's when we had to move into a different scale. So at that point I started using British wool in order to expand our range and be able to offer our range to other commercial buyers. So we were just a small scale retailer until this book came along. And then lots of high street stores started knocking on my door to say, can we stock your yarn? Completely the opposite way around to where my story began. And I needed to be able to say yes to them. But I knew initially I couldn't do that with alpaca, at which point our journey changed into a raw product that was more widely available so that I could keep expanding and servicing the demand that was then created.
And then it went overseas at the same time?
Absolutely. So around the same time, we moved out of just the UK base into the rest of the world. And we now have a huge market in the US and Australia. This book has been translated into 22 languages worldwide. So this goes ahead of me, really. It goes into new territories, and then amazingly the yarn shops come to us and knock on the door and say, hi, I have a yarn shop in Singapore. I would really like to stock your yarn alongside the book.
That's amazing.
So it changed me completely.
And also another thing you told me, which I found interesting, is to find new markets. You thought outside the box and you thought, okay, for instance, you've got a great series on dogs. So you went to dog shows around the UK and set up stands knowing that hardly anybody there would be able to crochet.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So that's been my real mission from the beginning. And we do have a formal vision and mission statement as a company. So my mission really is to spread this craft to as many people as possible and the happiness and enrichment that brings. So I presume if you're watching this, you probably are a knitter or a crocheter, so you know what it brings to your life. But lots and lots of people out there don't, and they're looking for a hobby. And I really do believe that it is a great hobby to have in your life. So we deliberately target shows where there are non-crafters that we'll be meeting, but we make sure that we have a product that is widely appealing. So At a dog show, we have 80 different breeds of dog kit. Everyone loves their dog, and if you're a dog breeder and you breed a specific breed, you love that dog.
And that breed.
Yeah. And so you are willing to learn to crochet to make your dog, and to make your dog exactly like your dog. Because when you crochet it yourself, you can change the colours, you can change the patterns, you can change the haircut if you want to, in order for it to completely resemble your breed.
Yes, we're going to have to make one of Jack, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So that changes everything. And then we have a team on standby to teach people. So obviously the initial reaction you get is, but I can't do it. It looks really hard. And you say, it's not really hard, it's just one stitch. And at that point, half the people believe you, half the people don't believe you. We have a team on standby to actually teach those stitches, so that the half of the people that say, there's no way I'll ever be able to do this, might fancy a seat because they've been walking around a show all day. They can sit down and we'll teach them the basics.
You're so clever.
I'm really passionate.
But it's a clever idea, and I can just imagine that it's a perfect way of bringing it to a new audience.
It is, and you see, you get, it's so fulfilling for me and the rest of the team too, because you see
the
that
excitement
passed on, and you see that initial excitement, and that keeps all of us going too, because you're passing that on all the time, and it's contagious. And we all remember that point that it happened for us when you finished knitting your first hat and went, this is great, I need another hat straight away, like how many more hats can I make?
Happens,
and it still does happen, and you see them do that for the first time, and that's a brilliant feeling.
That's wonderful. Okay, so let's talk now about the design process here at TOFT, because you design all of the toys, but the knit and crochet garments and accessories are a collaborative design process involving all of your team. And you also have textile degree students interning with you. So it'd be good to hear how that works. But first start with your process of designing the toys.
So when Edward's Menagerie did start by accident, and I think that's quite important to say. So TOFT had been running for quite a few years at that point. I was happily knitting away. We'd started to move into knitting kits, so kits rather than ready to wear, mainly because there was just demand for that. So people were suddenly asking me for the yarn and the pattern rather than just wanting to buy the hat. So I went with that and changed the business towards craft. Then when I was pregnant 7 years ago with my son, I decided I'm not going into work today. It was actually my due date, so I stopped working on my due date and said, I'm not going into work today. I'm going to have to do something else, otherwise this isn't going to happen. I watched one YouTube video. I learnt the double crochet stitch, the British double crochet stitch, or the US single. And that was that. I made an elephant that day. So I think I obviously understood yarn, and I really understood the yarn that we were using at that point. I understood the principles of building something and constructing, and the mathematics of that.
That initial teacher of yours must have really taught you very well.
Yeah, she must have taught me really well, the basics in a way that, that I think a lot of people don't get taught. And so all of a sudden, once I had this stitch, I could 3D construct in a way that I could not do knit-wise. And I was off. I made an elephant the first day. My son was 2 weeks late, and I had made the full 14 animals in 2 weeks. So I just did one a day. Like I finished one and I was straight on to the next one. I finished one, I was straight on to the next one. And I think that's why Edward's Menagerie has been so popular, is because that happens to other people too. So when they're making my patterns, it's that same feeling of, well, that was easy. Because it's only one stitch, like, that was easy and quicker than I thought it was. And then you go on to the next one. So again, that was a contagious element, accidental contagious element that got passed on. So have you got
a basic body formula?
Yeah, absolutely. So the original Edward's Menagerie book, of which there are now several hundred designs, are based on one body shape and one leg shape. And I just completely took that for granted, that was the way that things were done and that's the way I was going to do it. But I think that is what's quite unique. It means that they all sit together as a collection, which really helps with them being addictive for all of us too, because it's easy to return to something that you've done before because you know the pattern and you almost learn the pattern.
Yes.
So you don't need to carry around something to refer to. And it means that if you are going to build a shelf, whether that be in your office or in a baby's nursery or anywhere in a school, they will all sit together despite the fact that they're so varied. And it is unusual if you think that, say, a pygmy shrew, which is a tiny animal in reality, has the same exactly the same body and leg shapes as an elephant. It doesn't really make any sense. But it's quite hard for me to then capture. It's more of a challenge because I have to capture the animal without scale and without shape. The scale and shape is removed. I've not got many stitches to try and catch that animal.
So you're honing in on a few characteristics, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tend to start with a sketch now. Initially, in the early days, I didn't. And sometimes I can run them straight off without having to do that. But I tend to start with a sketch now to make sure that I've caught the characteristics. And then from that point, it will be a little bit of trial and error to get me through to the end.
So show us what you've got here. I'll hold them up.
So these are just really early dog sketches, really to show, to show where it begins. And I will do a sketch. It's as basic as that. I'm not an illustrator or anything like that. I'll do a basic sketch to try and work out the bits that I have to capture that are important. So this one is a Lakeland Terrier. The beard is the most important thing there, and then making sure that we've got the ears
in the right
correct
shape.
Scale, scale and shape. Yeah,
that's cool.
And the challenge for me now, so this one is a porcelain, is the fact that because the brand is global and these books go into so many languages, when I'm researching something like a dog book, I had to hit all the popular breeds across all countries, not just across the UK.
Although the UK's got a ton.
The UK does have a ton, but
we notice that when we come here.
Yeah, they do. It has an awful lot, and obviously we're really passionate about our pets and our dogs, so that helps. But there's certain breeds that I'd never heard of that I had to go in, which is different again than the level of research that I have to go into.
Yeah, okay.
So it's really basic sketching to try and get to some shapes. Then I might start to put colours onto him. If I've got enough time, I will colour in. But at the moment, I very rarely have enough time to do colouring in fully. I'll just head straight onto my crochet hook from that point onwards. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the process. And so you're still always designing toys. Do you do it, what part of the day do you get that in?
It very much depends. So in an ideal world, I'd love to say that I managed to sit down and calmly do that 9 till 5. Very often it's actually in the evening that I'll do that design work. So it's once I've kind of done my day job, which involves far more spreadsheets than you might imagine, obviously running the business, then my kids will go to sleep and I'll settle in to do some sketching, some design work, some drawing at night. When it's nice and calm, free of the rest of that. And it's how I wind down. Yeah. I do still really enjoy knitting and crocheting. Even though it might feel like work, I still very much enjoy the process of crocheting it myself.
Now, they're not all the same level. Some are definitely for beginners and some are more advanced, aren't they? So what are the most advanced stitches that you're using or techniques?
So the big challenge for me, if I'm honest, is the fact that I've got better at crocheting. So the reason why Edward's Menagerie was so popular and I think continues to be a best-selling book is the fact that I was a beginner crocheter writing a book for beginners. And that is very, very unusual. Usually people don't get publishing contracts to write craft books until they've crocheted and knitted for 50 years, by which point you've kind of forgotten what a beginner is. I really do put Edward's Menagerie's success down to the fact that I could barely crochet myself, is the truth. I'd learnt this one stitch, this double crochet, and then I'd just had a lot of fun with that double crochet stitch. The big challenge for me now that I'm better at crocheting, so now that I'm 7 years in, is to pare everything back myself too. Like I have to catch myself that just because I can make it look realistic doesn't mean I should. I have to remind myself of the first one I made was Bridget the elephant, and she doesn't look like an elephant. I can't tell you if she's an African elephant or an Asian elephant because I wasn't looking at Google Images at that point. Nowadays, New Kerry would absolutely try and capture the ear shape on the two different ones and the scale on those. So I have to remind myself that really first elephant is still one of the best-selling kits and designs that I've ever done, and she isn't too realistic. So just because I can make them realistic now, because I know different stitches and techniques, doesn't mean that I should. So I have to stop myself.
That's interesting. That's quite a different approach, isn't it? And your approach is similar with your knit and crochet design. So tell us about that then.
So we continue, TOFT produces yarn. We don't ever discontinue it. So we produce 4 weights of yarn and then we basically have fun producing designs with those set yarns. So quite a different attitude to other companies that might produce new yarns and then design patterns specifically for that yarn. This means that we're all very familiar with our weights and our tensions and which stitches work in our yarn and which stitches don't. So every quarter we produce a magazine to reflect that season. So this one was the summer one from this year, which is the reason why I've chosen to show this one is because it's the biggest challenge. We are a wool company, and selling wool in the summer is the biggest challenge. So designing a quarterly magazine to hit the summer months is one of the hardest ones that we do. So it's usually to produce a 10 pattern collection like is in a magazine. Half of them are knit and half of them are crochet, which is also unusual in a magazine because often people are quite polarised in I can do this or I can do this. Yeah. I really would like to keep them together in one place so that people are encouraged to go elsewhere, because I can do both, and I think that crochet and knit suit things for different purposes. So if I was going to make myself a garment to wear, I would still choose to knit it rather than necessarily crochet it. Yeah. And so I'm very much want people to play moving between the two things.
Okay, now you've got a couple of hat designs here, which are very, very simple and basic.
Yeah, they are, and this really summarises TOFT for me, and this is what I have to keep bringing us back to. So even if I am working with the broader team who now have much better skill levels than me, so I've actually managed to keep myself at a fairly basic knitting standard, which is quite useful. But some of my team are obviously very advanced knitters. Equally with the design students and interns that might come in, they're very ambitious in their designs. I think it's very common to try and do something to the top of your skill level rather than necessarily pare it back and think about the customer that's got to follow that pattern. So this hat here is a hat pattern that I designed 13 years ago when I just learnt the knit stitch. And obviously I just learnt that knit stitch and I just about mastered the purl stitch, and so that I was able to do a hat like this. It uses our chunky yarn on a really big needle size, so it's up on an 8mm, and I could probably knit this now in just over an hour or so, which is what was really important with that initial stage. It's in the round, which all of our hats are, because again I was looking for that finish on everything, so as much as possible avoid seaming for me to sew up and for the finish. For a beginner, go straight in.
But it's still really stylish, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really simple, and the yarn really helps with that, because we mainly work in a natural colour palette and it's about texture. I think the yarn does the hard work for you. So that design is 13 years old. This design is probably about 6 weeks old, and this has been our best-selling hat design over the pre-Christmas period this year. And again, it's absolutely simple. So it's barely stepping up from this.
So you're really bringing in new people into the knitting and crocheting world. That's what you're aiming for.
And that is my aim, and my target is to grow this market. So rather than just, I do cater, and some of our designs do cater to those that can already do, because obviously they skill up as they come with us. Yeah. But I think the most important thing for us as a company and the future of our company is to make sure we teach people from the very beginning so that we grow this market for the first time.
Yeah. And another thing you told me, which I thought was really interesting, is that you aim for mid-20s, which I thought was really low.
Yeah,
so tell us about that.
I think it's quite a different approach to the market. So a lot of our customer base, as you would expect, it spans actually right the way out into all decades. But the kind of bit that I will focus on when I'm thinking about design is people that are just coming to this for the first time in their mid-20s, especially with the animals, and then with the animals, the moving across to the knitwear is it needs to be fashionable. It needs to knit quickly. You need to be able to access all the skills that you need without having to rely on finding somebody else. So we do have YouTube video backup for everything, because likelihood is these people in their mid-20s won't necessarily have someone they can go and ask. I was like that because my mum doesn't knit. Neither do either of my grandmothers knit. So I was in isolation, other than the lady that had taught me. So it's important to have that backup too. And it's really, that's what's going to grow. These people are going to grow with it, work it into their life. And
the 2-hour project is just perfect for their lifestyle.
Yeah, perfect for lifestyle, where you can snatch a little bit of time, where you can turn time into being useful. So if you are doing a long commute, or you're doing a lot of waiting around doing something, it's filling that time in so that you make the most of it, rather than just scrolling on your phone screen, as is the temptation for a lot of us to waste time.
Okay, so quickly, this is a crochet design.
Yeah, this is the crochet design. So this really sums up the simplicity again of the design processes. We're just using trebles. There's nothing special to that at all, but it's really about the quality of the wool that gives it that amazing drape when you're working with it.
It does.
The colours. The simplicity of it being natural colour and all going in together, and the fact that it's simple, it's just one stitch. So once you've set off and you've done your first bit, you can relax into that process of making something rather than necessarily being challenged by something.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So I thought it would be really great if you could give the viewers some tips on better toy making and just tell us what are the common mistakes that crafters make?
So one of the most important things when crocheting animals really is to think about tension. So what I've got here is 2 little sardines, and these are both using a double knit yarn on a 3mm hook. But as you can see, you've got vastly different tension. So the only problem you've got is when you've got a tight tension with this style of crochet, they're going to become very stiff and very hard to work your stitches. So that's the downsides of that. With a big tension, you'll find it's actually a lot worse. You're going to see the stuffing through the holes, which is not very desirable at all. So a tip is just to make sure you watch that tension when you start. Swap your hook size up or down accordingly. I wouldn't necessarily try and do it psychologically to keep your tension tight or loose. Don't worry about that. Just swap your hook size up or down, making sure you're not seeing that stuffing through your stitches. Then if we talk about stuffing a little bit, that's quite important, is I think my designs are characterised by a tendency to understuff. So there's movement in everything. And that's because we're using a really good yarn that feels really good in your hand. What you don't want to feel is a stiff surface fabric. So I stuff very infrequently, really. It's just the body and the bottom of the legs that are stuffed in my designs. Very rarely will ears or other add-ons be stuffed. And what that means is people can hold on to them and they've all got movement to them.
Yeah, and it's
and you want to hold
kids.
them. Yeah, you want to hold them in your hand rather than release them when you get to that stage. So when you are doing your stuffing, just because you can fit an entire bag of stuffing inside your design, don't be tempted to overstuff it to its end.
Okay, good tip.
So really the last thing is about sewing on the bits and pieces at the end. And this is the most important bit for me, is take your time to sew them up. It still takes me an hour to sew up an animal. And I sew up all of the demos for the whole of the company. So even now, when we are doing demos to go into big high street chains where we might have to make 60 of the same thing, I still do all the sewing up, and it still takes me an hour, even though I'm well practiced. So take your time doing your sewing up. Do the extra stitches on both sides to make sure that they're really firm.
And do it in an order?
Yeah, I will always put my head onto my body first, then put the top limbs in position, and then the bottom ones. But the most important thing really that I wanted to show you that's quite key to the designs is the angle that you sew those bottom legs on. So it's quite important to me with them all that they will all sit up and self-support. This is what means that they look like they're coming to life rather than being flat toys. And what's absolutely key to that is this tummy here balances the weight of that head, and that means that they don't flop forward and they can all sit up. And then if you tip up to look at the bottom, if you imagine a straight line coming down from the centre of that tummy here where I've got that needle, you're going to sew those bottom legs on an angle that leaves a third behind. And that means that when they sit forward, those legs splay at the correct angle. Then if they put their hands on their knees, they will all sit up and self-support. And it means that they should look like when you walk out of the room, they might jump up and come to life. That's what's going to make Emma the Bunny look like Emma the Bunny, rather than just a bunny.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what about the face markings? So that's really crucial too.
Yeah, it's really crucial, but I only use a black thread. I think that surprises people. You can use safety eyes and other bits and pieces, but I just use a black over-dyed thread and 2 stitches, so it's very, very simple. So I'll come up through the surface of the fabric with my black. And then I tend to use it as a grid. So on the surface of your fabric, you've got rows. Use them, don't ignore them. It means that you can get your symmetry yourself. So I'll come down in a straight line, approximately around 2 rows. Pull that through. And it's amazing for me how much you can characterise it just with 2 black lines. So come across the other side. Now my standard eye size is exactly what I've done there, which is around 2 rows. If you put them smaller, your animals will start to look a bit more scary. I generally would avoid going too small, but you can get some lovely effects by going horizontal. They would look sleepy. Going bigger will always make things look younger. So say your Emma the Bunny might not be in her 50s, she might be in her teens, or she might even be a baby bunny.
Yeah.
Just do probably 5 or 6 more rounds, make those eyes a little bit bigger, and it will instantly look like a younger animal. rather than an older one.
That's amazing. All these, I mean, you have to know you're sewing on so many faces.
Yeah, and it really is trial and error. I think the other thing to remember is I still very much go wrong. So sometimes when I'm doing a new design, so I've just put a really simple nose on there too. Again, just using black straight lines. Is sometimes I will go wrong and cut them off and start again. And just remember that's not a problem. Like, don't panic too much about it. It's so easy to remove them and rebuild them. And on a new one, I will sometimes have to do that several times over.
There she is. Isn't she gorgeous? So what do you do with this?
So on the end, I'll pull it through like that, and I will just snip that off. Okay. Just make sure you've come through a lot of the stuffing. That's what makes a big difference, is the fact that I've moved through all of that internal stuffing before I get to the other side. I've used an over-dyed black, which makes a big difference too. So it's a strong colour that comes off the natural tones. Another nice tip is using a silk or a cotton. Can be quite nice because you'll get a sheen to the eyes rather than something that is quite flat. But I'm a big advocate of just using stitching rather than using the classic safety eyes.
It looks really classical toy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a really traditional finish to it, and obviously it is then completely safe for all ages of baby and child.
Fantastic.
I can see you could really get excited about making collections of those toys, and there are so many different themes there with the dogs and the birds and the farm animals. And
yeah, they're fantastic. And I think you could just make the little toys and put them around the house, and when you come across them accidentally, they'll put a smile on your face.
Yeah, that's what I think.
It reminds me when Madeline was a little kid, she would arrange her toys in just this funny construction. She'd obviously been playing with them, and I'd just come across them accidentally and they'd be in some weird position, and it just lightens your day. You think, oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think those toys would do the same thing. I really liked the policeman with his little moustache. He was so sort of upright with his little helmet. There's a lot of good characters there.
Yep. Kerry's offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 10% discount on everything in her online store. That includes yarn, patterns, knit kits, crochet kits, books and magazines. So enjoy browsing through all of that, and thank you very much to Kerry.
If you're here with us now watching, we do ask you to please support the show by becoming a patron. We're completely reliant on the financial support of our patrons to keep producing the show. We don't receive any revenue from advertising or sponsorship, and every single patron counts.
Yeah, I did want to mention one thing. We know we've had a couple of comments saying that we do have ads on the show, so YouTube shows advertising during Fruity Knitting. The reason that happens is that we use copyright music. Most of the music we use is actually copyright, and we can do that because YouTube agrees to send the revenue from that directly to the musicians who produce the music. So we don't get any revenue from that at all. So please do support us by becoming a patron. It only takes a very small amount each month to make a real contribution, and it's easy to do. So take the trouble to head over to Patreon and do that. And to everyone who has done that, all of our viewers who are already patrons, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So I get to appear in Bring and Brag this week, this episode, and that is because I have essentially finished my powder puff scarf. Here it is, designed by Nancy Marchant from her book Tuck Stitches, and this is actually my contribution to our Tuck Stitch and Brioche lace cowl that you can find either in the Ravelry group or on the Patreon community. This has been a bit of a disappointing project for me, and it's really only because of a mistake that we made. The colours aren't really good, and so it has taken a bit of soldiering through and persisting to get this finished.
You've been such a trooper.
I have been a trooper. We mentioned this in an earlier show. The colours we picked are okay, or they're good in their own, and they look good next to each other when they're in the ball.
Yeah.
But I did find when I started knitting them up that they sort of mush into each other and turn into a bit of a muddy result. It's not really bad, but it's just not as bright as it could have been.
Yeah,
and it's a bit disappointing.
They cancel each other out.
Yeah.
But your knitting, again, is incredibly neat.
It's incredibly neat.
Might be able to show you a photo, but it's incredibly neat and very even, and there's a ton of stitches in here because it's quite a small gauge.
It's a lot of stitches. It's taken a lot of work.
What we might do is just join the ends, and then it'll be just a nice loose sort of cowl that you can put twice around your neck like this.
Yeah.
And it'll just, I'm getting all the yarns caught up, and it'll just sort of sit around your neck in a nice kind of cloud.
Yeah. It is
fluff.
very cozy. We do have this idea of over dyeing it, but neither of us have ever done any dyeing.
No, and I
So-
just don't have time to learn how to do it properly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we'll,
so
we'll
if we do
see.
it, we won't do it properly. Could be disastrous. I have got some extra yarn. I did think we might do a bit of a trial, but chances are we won't.
Yeah, it'll probably just, maybe we'll give it away to someone who likes it.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
But, yeah. We do have a couple of projects which are
Very successful.
candidates. Well, no, candidates for dyeing is what I was
Yeah.
thinking, because there was also your hat.
That's true.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Anyway, we do want to show you a powder puff with very successful colour combinations, and here's a picture of it here.
Birgit has entered her powder puff scarf into the tuck stitches and brioche lace cowl, and she has chosen very good contrasting colours with this orange and a sort of light bluey grey. So congratulations, Birgit, your version looks much better than mine. Now, you might remember that before I started doing this scarf, I did this beautiful swatch. It's right here. You can see I've just tried out a whole lot of different stitch patterns from Nancy Marchant's book, and which was a really great thing to do. And one of our favourites was this one here, which is number 31, and we can actually show you a sample of this in use. Here's a cowl that was entered into the knit along with that very same tuck stitch, so it's pattern number 31. This project's by Ferrin, who I know is in Barcelona, and it looks really brilliant with incredibly neat knitting, so well done, Ferrin. And while we're looking at pictures of projects from the cowl, here is a very good dog helpfully modelling a brioche lace shawl, which is a design by Stephen West. This project was entered by Joan, and what a good dog he is. He's doing a great job there.
He's beautiful. And so is the shawl.
The shawl is beautiful too, yes. And one last project to show you is this pair of socks with a really interesting tuck stitch pattern, and this project is from Rika. All of those projects have been entered into the finished objects thread for the knit along. So if you have finished your project, make sure you get it in there. And if you haven't finished, I'm sure you're inspired to do so by seeing all of those beautiful finished garments and accessories. The cowl itself finishes at the end of May, so there's still actually time to get in and do a new project. And I think it's really worthwhile having a go at this tuck stitches technique. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So, and lots of inspiration in all of those threads. So check them out. Now that I have finished my scarf project, I am free to select a new project, which is really good. The world is my oyster.
It's a great feeling that when you're free to start something new and you could choose anything.
Yeah. Andrea already mentioned that we had planned for me to do Geraldine the Duck.
Yeah.
But Andrea did Geraldine, so I've actually had to go. I've never done any crochet, but last night Andrea showed me how to do the double crochet stitch.
We started last night.
It was a very shaky start. I think
It was a very shaky start.
both of us were thinking this is not going to work. But I actually got the hang of it.
I was really surprised. Inside an hour, I changed from
This is not going to work at all.
to, wow, you got it together.
Yeah, I'm not a natural at some of these things anyway. And then after getting over that initial hurdle, we were straight into the tension topic, which is always a thing. So it was very loose at first, and then it got very tight.
And
we
now
ripped
you're
it back,
Goldilocks.
and now I'm Goldilocks, so it's all good. So there's my little duck started off, and I think I'll push through with that.
You can't make any comments about how slow he crochets. That's not nice.
I do.
No, you can.
You can make your own
We don't
comments. I just
mind.
don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Yep. Anyway, so that's that. When Andrea asks me what I want to do next as a project, one of the key criteria is that it's not stressful, because by the time I get to sit down and do any knitting, I'm pretty much done. And so I don't want anything that's difficult and takes too much concentration or counting.
You like just long rows with the same rhythm of something, don't you?
Yeah, I'm a master of
Actually,
stocking stitch.
you were good
This
with
was okay. This was actually quite good because I could always see where I was. So even if I got
Yeah.
distracted, I could see immediately. It's just it's a very easy pattern.
Yeah.
And the technique itself is very easy. So that was fine. Yeah, anyway, stocking stitch. I'm very good at stocking stitch.
Master.
Yeah. So one pattern that we have been looking at together is actually this design by Kim Hargraves. It comes from her latest capsule collection, Covet, and the design is called Devote. It's designed for the Rowan Alpaca Soft DK, and it has lots of wonderful stocking stitch and garter stitch, so I'll be in heaven.
And it's a style of garment that I don't already have, which is great. And I think it's just unusual and stunning and elegant. And I think you'll do it really well. I'm very excited about it, and I've ordered the book already for you, and it's already arrived.
Yeah.
So all around the world, we are being asked to drastically limit the contact that we have with other people and to stay at home as much as possible. But luckily for us, we have this wonderful, comforting craft that we can all do, which kind of relaxes us and just helps to make the time go faster. But nevertheless, I'm sure many of you feel really hemmed in. So we are going to take you on a virtual hike to see some really stunning and timeless scenery. So we're going to Snowdonia in Wales, and this footage was taken when we were on our Christmas holiday. And we're going to take you to an old mining village called...
Tani Grizial.
Yeah, and that's on the southern side of the Molwen mountain range.
Yeah, so this village is famous as a slate mining town. And above the area that we'll see, there are these huge slate quarries, which were taken out of operation in the late 1970s, I think. And we pass by these miners' huts and little houses, and I think they're really beautiful and really melancholy, and they just make you think back to the lives that these miners would have been living.
It is amazing when you read up about the hard and harsh lifestyle of previous generations. And then it makes you deeply, deeply grateful for the kind of luxurious lifestyle that we all enjoy now in comparison. It's so stark, the comparison. And like Andrew said, in the footage, you're going to see these ruins of miners' huts, which actually look very romantic and beautiful. But the families that lived there would have been cold and hungry more often than not. And they definitely had no financial security and no healthcare system and no sick leave whatsoever. But yet, when they opened their front door, they looked out on paradise. And this always staggers me. I get the same feeling when we go to Shetland and you're at this most stunning scenery and you see an abandoned croft. They again would have had extremely hard lives. And I just wonder if they themselves saw the irony of it, this contradiction in their lives of being starving and full of, in desperate poverty, but then looking out on paradise. It just blows me away. Anyway, I just wanted to read you a quote just because it really gives you a good idea of people's lives back in previous generations. So this is a quote by a Welsh miner who was living in this area which you're going to see, and it's describing working conditions when he was a boy in 1876. So he writes, "I well remember the time when I myself was a child of bondage, when my father and neighbours, as well as myself, had to rise early to walk 5 miles before 6 in the morning and the same distance home after 6 in the evening, to work hard from 6 to 6, to dine on cold coffee or a cup of buttermilk and a slice of bread and butter, and to support, as some had to do, a family of perhaps 5, 8 or 10 children on wages averaging from 12 shillings to 16 shillings a week." So that's really quite amazing. And I'm certainly not reading the quote to depress you. That's not my intention. But it is interesting that it certainly helps me when you are feeling really, really worried, and just to try to look around and see the kinds of things that you can be grateful for. And when you kind of know the life of previous generations, they would look on our lifestyle and our healthcare system as if it's just a completely unthinkable miracle. So we do have things to be grateful for, which I think is great. Anyway, enjoy the stunning scenery that's coming your way. I really hope it does lift up your spirits. And I've also added in some of my favourite Welsh proverbs. So coming up now is part 2 of our interview with Kerry. You're going to really enjoy it. It's packed with information. So apart from seeing the alpacas and the baby alpacas, which is super cute, we've got great footage there, you're going to learn about alpaca fibre, which is really interesting as a knitter. You're going to see even more designs, and they're fantastic. Lots of bird designs. And particularly what's interesting for me, I found interesting, was Kerry talks about the kinds of things that have helped her build up her business. So I think that's helpful for a lot of people to hear. Thank you for spending time with us again, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yep, thanks for being with us. Bye.
Bye. So the alpaca farm is the base for the whole company, and your parents were actually one of the first alpaca farmers in the UK, and through their breeding system or their breeding program, they've really influenced alpaca farming here, which is very interesting. And so they're farming for commercially valuable fleeces, and you're doing most of the sorting, which I also find interesting that you've got time for that. So it would be really great if you could tell us something about alpaca farming and, you know, what the calendar year is like. And then if you could give us like a mini grading lesson, what you're looking for in the top quality alpaca fleece.
So we have about 250 alpacas here now at TOFT, and we've had them since I was 8 years old. We started with 4, and it very much was a hobby initially. So the whole idea was that it was something to do to eat the grass. I'm one of 4 children. It was something to make us go outside and enjoy. But my parents rapidly fell in love with them, as we all do as an animal, and they turned it into a business. So they were breeding alpacas to sell alpacas to other people that might want to have them either as pets, because again, they're a really attractive animal, or possibly use them as guardian animals, because an alpaca walks towards a fox rather than away from a fox, which means they're quite commonly kept with small flocks of sheep or even chickens to protect them from the foxes. And then the third reason that people have them is a bit more commercial, so it's about having them to breed the fibre. So what does an alpaca, I guess, look like across a year? They get sheared once a year, and we shear here at TOFT in May. So it's once a year, that's it, that it comes off. You cut their toenails every 3 to 4 months, so they have a bit of a manicure every 3 to 4 months. They get fed every day. The gestation period is often quite astounding for people. It's 11.5-month gestation. And twins is really rare. We've never had a case of twins here at TOFT. It's about 1 in 50,000 chance of getting twins.
And do they birth easily?
Yeah, at the moment they absolutely do. So because alpacas, they haven't been as overbred as some of the other farming species that we might see here in the UK, is they're a lot more self-sufficient. So usually what will happen is we will walk out into the field and there'll be a cria, which is the name for a baby alpaca. C-R-I-A is a cria. There'll be a cria just walking around on the ground. That would be in most of the cases. So once we will have about 50 cria here a year born, and maybe 1 out of that 50 we might have to intervene. So that's the kind of rate that something might be a bit more unusual. Because my parents have had them for a lot longer than a lot of people, and it really has grown in popularity in that time. They are some of the most experienced people in terms of owning alpacas in the UK. They're both judges, so they travel the world actually judging alpacas in show rings around the world.
And there's 2 types of alpacas.
There are. So the most common type that you will know is the Warwickshire, which is Huacaya. They're the ones that are fluffy and look like teddy bears or Ewoks. And they have a crimpy fleece that grows out at a right angle from the skin, which is what gives them that fluffy look. That's 96% of all of the world's population of alpacas. The second type is the Suri, which is Suri, and they have a straight silky fleece, much more like a Wensleydale sheep, much more of a lock. You'll recognise them in the field because they'll look like wet mop heads, if you know what I mean by that. They've very much got locks and they're shiny and they look wet. So when they walk, their fleece moves rather than being that dense, crimpy. We have both types here at TOFT for interest's sake, really, more than anything. But the Suri is a much harder fleece to process. It really is mainly the Wakaya, which is the commercial fleece that we're focused on. Yeah.
Okay.
So talking a little bit more about fleece. The alpaca, the really exciting thing about alpacas is the fact they come in a wide range of colours. So they come in, I think they actually grade in the show ring to over 20 colours when they're in the show ring. But I work to 12 colours as set colours. So from the kind of white fleeces at one end, right the way through all the browns you can imagine. And then you do get some naturally grey alpacas too. So not just an animal going old with age, naturally grey alpacas.
Okay.
So the big challenge with an alpaca is the fact that it's born with the best fleece it will ever have. So when it is born, it's baby alpaca, it's as good as it will ever be. And then every year of its life, an alpaca's fleece will get slightly coarser. This means that alpacas are most valuable in their first 5 to 8 years of their life, commercially as a fleece. Once you get past that point, it has to be a very good quality alpaca in order to maintain the quality of fleece to still be used in yarn processing. So when you have an alpaca, obviously their fleece grows all over their bodies. Mm-hmm. If you imagine a pony's saddle dropped onto the back of an alpaca, the fibre that the saddle touches is the bit that would be used in processing. So very rarely will the neck fibres be long enough to be able to be processed, and the leg fibres will be usually far too coarse to be processed. So it really is just
it's only a small
back.
Section.
It is a small section. So if you shear all the fibres off the whole of a full-grown alpaca male, you might actually shear a weight as big as 3.5 kilos to 4 kilos of fleece. But by the time you have disregarded any fibres that are too short, any potential foliage contamination, all of that, then by the time it gets scoured and processed into a yarn, you're usually sub 1 kilo per alpaca. Which is not a lot. To say that you only shear them once a year, and you are very hands-on and looking after them for a whole year. So what you're looking for in the fibre, like most fibres, is you're looking for the fibres to be as fine as possible. So it's graded in terms of micron, in the same way that sheep's fleeces are, that you're looking for a fine micron. The difference with alpaca really is the fact that it has guard hairs in, so it's a dual fleece. So alpaca, these are the really fine fibres where you've got the crimp growing throughout, and then this is a guard hair.
That's still a fine guard hair.
It is still a fine guard hair compared to some species.
Absolutely. What would you say, what micron count would that be?
This micron would definitely go into our first or second grade fleeces, so it's probably sitting below 18 to 20 micron. Wow. So it is still very fine compared to some breeds, but when we're grading it, it's not as straightforward as just looking for micron. And I think that's a mistake that quite a lot of people make. In fact, what I've seen a lot of people do is use a tool, almost an engineer's tool, to try and grade that as a micron. Because it's a dual fleece, it's almost regardless of how fine that is, if the guard hairs are too coarse or too frequent, it still wouldn't hit that top grade for me. It would still go into a lower grade because it's not de-haired in a completely thorough way before it goes through to processing.
But
so
how
you
much
have to bear that in
de-hairing
mind.
would you have to do anyway? I mean,
very little. So say this fleece here that I've chosen, and this would be able to go straight into fleecing, straight into processing, other than removing the foliage contamination. And that's because our alpaca tends to get spun first and scoured at the end. So very different to processing a sheep's fleece. Because it's a dry fibre, it only usually has 4 to 5% lanolin.
Oh, okay.
Is why it has no grease and oil. It doesn't have a smell. If we had sheep's fleeces in front of us, you would have smelled them. It has very little smell because it has so little lanolin. So it means that we'll usually spin dry straight like this and then scour at the end is the way our big batch alpaca used to be processed, which is very different way around. But the foliage then does need to be removed as much as possible. The larger pieces of foliage need to be removed by hand before it goes in. Mm-hmm. This example that I've got here is a terrible, I mean, I don't even like touching it, I'll be totally honest. This is an example probably of an older alpaca's fleece. This is how bad it can get. Like this might be
completely guard
totally
hair.
different. Yeah, it's just total guard hair. So it might be coming off the legs or the underbelly of an alpaca in an older animal. And it's amazing that one animal in the course of its life could go for something as amazing like that to something like this. And it's remembering that this shouldn't be a yarn, because alpaca's reputation is built upon it being really soft, it being sheeny, it being alive and have movement. If you turn this into a yarn, it would look like baling twine. But it would still technically be alpaca.
And there's no crimp in this.
There's no crimp in that whatsoever.
This alpaca's lost all of his crimp.
Yeah, so it really is, about the aging process, staying there. It's also grading to staple length, so making sure that within your batch, your average staple length is about the same. That's because the second that you combine, say, the neck fibres, which might be short like this brown one that I've got here, if you spin your average blanket fibre with your neck fibre, the neck fibres wrap themselves around it during processing and cause a natural slubbing, which is usually regarded, unless you were intending to make a slubby yarn, it would be something that was outside your control, something that wasn't desirable.
Okay.
Because the short ones just wrap themselves around the long ones and then cause a slubbing. Okay. But you could, in theory, store up all of your neck fibres if they were of finest quality to a similar length, and then spin a batch of shorter length.
But also, short.
It's very short fibres. You'd have to combine it with a longer staple length in order to something else like a wool in order to spin it into a yarn.
So these are some natural colours. What would you call, what's this representative of?
So this is just another average quality fleece, really. Like this one is a bit more exceptional than this one. This is a good quality fleece. That's probably an adult animal that's going to be cutting a bit more fibre. So that's the balance, really, is when they're young, their fleeces are really fine. They tend to have more foliage in them. So they're a bit more of a challenge to process. Whereas once they hit that kind of 2-year, 3-year, 4-year point, you've got those true commercial fleeces where they're cutting a lot more, they're a lot cleaner, and they're a lot easier to sort because you, in a very straightforward manner, skirt off all the edges that are undesirable and it can go straight in for processing.
Okay, and you're doing most of the sorting because you're most particular about
and that, I guess, I'm very particular because it's most important to me that the alpaca retains its reputation, because it would be very easy to spin a yarn that would destroy a reputation. Because if you knit with something once, and I don't just mean TOFT's reputation, I mean alpaca's reputation, because if you bought one skein and you knitted yourself a scarf and you found it really itchy, you would never buy it again. You would say, oh no, alpaca, I don't like it. So it's quite a responsibility.
Funnily enough, some people do say that.
They do,
that alpaca's itchy.
It's itchy, and it's because it's got a lot of guard hair in it. And so it is a responsibility to the fibre itself to make sure that you don't ruin that fibre's reputation, because it would just take once and then you'd never buy it again.
Now what's interesting is it comes in you work with 12 different natural colours and you've transferred that over into your wool yarns. So tell us about the wool yarns. What breed are you using and how are they spun?
So this happened about 6 to 7 years ago. The company transformed. Basically I was spending 5 days a week fleece sorting with alpaca and not able to spend enough time on the rest of the business, not able to spend enough time growing it, designing, any of the other things that I was doing. So I looked for a fibre that was of an equivalent quality that would allow us to move into a commercial, a kind of commercial spectrum. So we're using a Falklands Merino of a really fine mark, as fine as we can get. It's basically the top grade Falklands Merino that I can source, so that it's really soft. And actually, I now prefer this possibly to the alpaca, which is amazing that we came from there and in. I love the fact that the alpaca that we do spin comes from our alpacas, and the fact that it's traceable right the way back. But I really enjoy working with the wool. It's really bouncy. It really suits what we're doing more now with the animals and all the different things that we're doing.
Yeah. So it is worsted spun and 2-ply.
Yeah, well, that's our double knit is.
Okay.
We actually do 4 different weights. So we do a single, which would equate to a 4-ply, then our double knit comes out of that. Then there's an Aran weight, which is twice the double, and then a chunky that sits at the top end. And that's the 4 weights that I work with. The exciting thing about the crochet animal patterns is the fact that you can use all of these weights and you can make different animals from tiny ones right the way through to chunky ones, but using the same pattern.
And there's all the colour ranges in the naturals that you
It is,
isn't
and
it?
these come from the natural alpaca colours. So obviously the bulk of fleeces will be cream into all of these spectrums. The most interesting colours that we produce at TOFT, and they're the hardest ones for me to replicate back into the wool, are stone, which is this colour, and mushroom, which is this one. And that's because we don't have any straightforward colours. So all of our yarns are fibre dyed. So we actually now take obviously the majority of the wool fleeces we buy are this colour, and we dye that fibre back to the natural colours of the alpaca. Then I reblend them back together in order to hit these complex colours. And that is a very long process, but it's what makes them really unique to TOFT, is the depth of those natural colours. Yeah. So one like these two would actually be combinations of all of these colours together. Our greys, say like a grey like this might be 5% black with 95% of a dark colour. And that's how I hit all of the different spectrum colours, is by blending those colours back together to a very unique formula.
And you've kept your real colours, if I can say real colours.
No, definitely.
To a minimum, just 6 colours, haven't you?
So we've just introduced 2 more, so just taking it to 8. But we're a natural colour company. Like, that's what I am in love with, is the natural colour spectrum. It makes it really easy and attractive for me to build things that work together. I feel like it's all I need. But every now and again, you need a bit of a highlight to set those off. So it's a very limited palette. They need to complement the naturals and enhance the naturals rather than take away from them. And so I've been very brutal, really. The little colours are only available in 25-gram balls to ensure that we mainly design working in a natural colour spectrum, and we highlight with a pop of colour rather than knitting a whole hat in a colour. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, that's fascinating. Now, it's Christmas. It's just 1 week, I think, to Christmas. Yeah, and TOFT has got some fantastic, really gorgeous new Christmas toy designs coming out. There's 12 Birds of Christmas and the Nutcracker doll. So what can you tell us about
I get very excited about Christmas. So every year we bring out lots and lots of new designs. So this year, because we introduced these 2 new colours, so we've introduced ruby red and we've introduced an amethyst purple to the colour range for the first time at TOFT. They've inspired a whole new range of designs. So these are one of the dolls, which is from my doll book. So it comes off the same, again, a standard form. There is a standard human shape, and then you can dress them up in different ways. And the Nutcracker, I think he's one of the most... he's not complex to make, but he's got the most features. Yeah. So in one single project, you can really have a good play with so many different techniques. You've got a little bit of loop stitch, you've got some back loop, you've got chain detail, like lots of little bits and pieces for you to enjoy skilling up as you go
gorgeous.
through.
He's really gorgeous.
And the elves have been a massive hit this year. We're all as addicted to making them in different colours. So I've seen elves made in every single colour in the TOFT range now, combining the colours in different ways.
Yeah, they are. They're stunning. Okay, and the 12 Birds of Christmas.
Yeah, so this is something that... so it is a lot of birds. So I guess the 12 Days of Christmas song, I had no idea that every single one represented a bird until we started to research this. You know the ones that are really common. So you obviously know the partridge, which is here. You know the turtle doves. Yeah. You know the swans. But actually, this is the piper's piping because it's a sandpiper. Ah. And then this is the maids are milking, which is the cattle egret. So then it's not random. It does represent the song.
Amazing.
So here's the turtle dove. The lords are leaping are the herons because herons jump when they set off to fly.
This is fascinating.
This is the woodpecker, which
bringing
is
a completely different new meaning to Christmas.
Yeah, which is the drummer's drumming, is the woodpecker. And the thing with a bundle like this is the fact that you've got so many different things. So you're really playing with that natural colour spectrum, as you can see. Obviously, there's a lot of cream in those ones we have in our hands, but you're playing with all the greys and the browns, and you've got these lovely highlights of colour that sit alongside them at the same time.
Look at his wings, aren't they beautiful? You must have had such fun.
I had fun researching them, and then I had a lot of fun actually designing them and making them. And it really, for me, Christmas, a handmade Christmas is a great thing. And when you make something like this, you'll bring them out every single year. So you've got your 12 Birds of Christmas on your mantelpiece. Yes, it might take you a couple of Christmases to make all 12, but you bring them out every year then. Or they could sit on a tree.
I think it's a wonderful, wonderful idea. I didn't even know that, but that's great. And they are stunning. Look at them. Fantastic. Okay, now we're going to finish off the interview by, I want to ask you a couple of questions about, because I think it's really impressive how you've built up your business. I think it's extraordinary, and I'm sure the audience feels that way as well. So I'd like to ask, the next 2 questions are about how you think or how you work and how that might have helped you become so successful. So, for instance, you're the owner, you're the manager, and you're the head designer of TOFT. That's a lot of work. That's at least 2 full-time jobs there. So how do you juggle all of those positions? Like, do you have any time management or task management principles or any other kind of principles that you tend to work by that you think have really helped you be successful?
So the most important thing, I think, first is to admit that there's 16 of us. So it's not just me. It very much was me. So the first 5 years of TOFT, it was just me and a tabletop stall. And I got my things out and I sold them. I added it up again and then I made more things. That was really the first 5 years. But now TOFT we're a company of 16 people. And I absolutely could not do it without those 16 people. Yes, I am a person that has a lot of ideas. And that is what I am very lucky with, is I don't seem to be running out of ideas anytime soon. I love my job and I love each day. And I think that makes a big difference because I've got a lot of energy to keep doing it. But I am very reliant and the success of the company very much is testament to the team that now sit around me. Many of whom have been with me for several years now, so we've grown together. I like to control and think about everything. That doesn't mean that people don't have independence within that team, but I would never expect someone to do a job that I didn't understand what that job was. So I do work right the way across the whole company, which is really important. I love nothing more than packing a parcel and serving a customer. So I still do all the shows face to face. I think it's really important in my product development to actually meet the customer who's buying this product.
To understand what they want.
To understand what they want and take that feedback. And there's nothing more valuable than to stand there and earwig slightly on a conversation that might be happening between two people as they walk towards your stand, and what they say, what their first impression is, whether they've seen you before, what they're drawn to, whether they like the display, and I'll constantly adapt based on that feedback. That's the best way for me to evolve. And I think that's what's been quite key in the success is I've never stayed the same. We change what we do year on year, thankfully, because I have a lot of ideas. And that's what I enjoy. I embrace change rather than becoming too attached to an idea that worked last year. You'd very rarely hear me say, yeah, we'll just do it like we did last year. There's no way I would do that. It would be, so we did this last year, this was great. What can we do that's like that but better? And constantly move forward as we move the company forward.
But it does take a lot of energy, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and you'd also and your attitude towards when things go wrong would be important.
Yeah, so the thing is I'm not precious. I'm really not precious. Everyone has bad ideas. Yes, I might have some good ideas, but I've also had some incredibly bad ideas. And it's accepting that if it's a bad idea, to just let it go, to just let it go and not try and defend that idea, maybe develop that idea. So say, okay, that part of it works, but maybe the packaging doesn't work, or maybe this was too complicated, or maybe, I will not necessarily completely abandon that idea, but I will not flog an idea if it was fundamentally wrong. You have to accept, oh, that was a bad one. I was having a bad day. And you just move on with the next thing. Yeah. And I think it's being open-minded enough to take that feedback calmly, not get hurt too much. And that is experience. Like there's still days where feedback hurts. Obviously there are days because it's creative. Especially when you are creative, you're putting a lot into it. There are days when feedback hurts, but it's also accepting that that's what it's all about. And taking the highs, like embracing those highs, because there will be lows in running a business.
And just one more question along those lines, and that's a question about advice. So I'd like to know, what's the best advice you've received from other people over the years, and has there been any advice given to you from a very experienced authority, so to speak, that you've actually chosen to ignore, and that's been a really good thing?
Yeah, very much so. So I run on gut probably over everything because I don't have any qualifications in textiles or business. So I very much just run on gut. And my biggest piece of advice would be to find people that you can trust to get their opinion, because you're never going to have time to become an expert in accountancy, in law, in all of these things. So build up a team of people around you, even if they're not your immediate employed team, but a team of people around you that you trust, in order to accept, I can't waste a whole week becoming an expert in this. I need to just ask someone a question and get an answer. My other advice would be to say yes as much as possible, but also know when to say no, which is a hard one. So I will usually, in the vast majority of time, say yes to every opportunity. So if someone rings me and has an idea, I will say yes to that and work with that, whether that be going to a new show or, flying over to have a look at a different shop or something like that. I'll say yes. I'll embrace the opportunities that are there. But be careful to know when to say no. So the best example is, had I turned around and when John Lewis or Paper Chase or Liberty or any of the stockists that we now have, had I turned around and said yes when they first knocked on our door to ask for TOFT to be stocked in there, I absolutely would not be here now. We were not ready. We weren't ready. We didn't have a team that was ready to deliver that volume. We didn't have a product that was ready to be shelf ready. We didn't have... I wasn't ready to run a company of that size to change it. I think it probably would have collapsed at that stage.
But were you scared at the time to say no because you thought, what if that's my chance gone by? You didn't sort of think, I'll say yes and then I'll try to get this team. I think I was. I have confidence because I'm not somebody that has a business plan that spans 5 years into the future. My business plan will span to the point next year, and my aim would be to be the same as next year or a bit better, but not ever. I won't ever push us past that point unless it happens naturally. That said, if something occurs and I feel like we can run with it, I will throw my full shoulder behind running with something to get there. But it's also recognizing, that to not go too early. Don't try and run before you can walk those, because it definitely could have followed us over a few times. Now I'd be even busier, but not necessarily any more successful. Yeah. That's so interesting and great advice. It's been fantastic to get to know you better and to know the insides of your business. So we really appreciate having you on the show. Thank you so much. It's been a really enjoyable time. Good. Let's say goodbye. Bye. Bye.